get to the point I'm trying to raise. He just mentioned that Chetan Bhagat, if you write too much better than him, we face the same thing as tabla players as well. That if you play a little too well, then you might actually be excluded from the concert.
That is not fair.
I'll tell you why. What happens is, I mean, this is. I've seen this happen in many fields, not just literature or music. But I think that the law of averages. If you are average, it's a comfortable zone for people to accept. But if you're really above average and if you're going in, if you're trying to project something which is very special, then there is a lot of resistance which comes around. And I think the society, the way it is today, is actually even more congenial to allowing the average to exist comfortably. But
Cradle of mediocrity.
yeah,
Yeah.
if you're mediocre, then you're comfortably off because you can fit into a variety of scenarios. But if you're not mediocre and you're specializing and you're really trying to push that level of brilliance there, then you actually end up in a lot of trouble as a career person, as a professional. I mean, do you endorse that view at all, Shubhaji? You didn't at the start.
Well, I believe in excellence, which is why I often have my husband playing for me.
Wow. Here.
But on a personal, I mean, there is this issue of shrinking spaces for what we call what has been termed serious art. But I think on a personal level, as somebody who has made a commitment to the study of music, I feel that come what may, whether mediocrity finds importance and significance everywhere or not, I'm a bit of an optimist, and I feel that in every field, in India, as I'm sure it must happen outside India as well, there are people who follow the impulse, that crazy, compulsive, artistic impulse to do what they love best. And I think it's that. I mean, I can't put it eloquently. Perhaps you would be better able to describe that. But I think, really, people are constantly trying to find their own voice, as it were. And I think that there are several people of that kind in India.
Yes.
And fortunately for us, I mean, unfortunately for us, many of us do not get to know them, but when we do, we have respect for them. And that's why we find that there are still organizations, individuals, each of them following their own heart and making the kind of art that they believe in, whether or not it finds television popularity, large crowds or not. And I think that as long as that impulse is there, even though the atmosphere and the environment may not be conducive.
I just had a thought. Sorry, I'll just come back to this. It's an interesting thought, and I've, you have, from the time that the remixes started of songs and everything, you had this big fat downbeat they used to put into everything, like boo, boo, boo. So this downbeat, I think that I've heard songs which have had amazing little subtle instrumental sections which are drowned by that big fat downbeat. And that downbeat is actually becoming, it's scary how important it's becoming when you look around you. If a car whizzes past you, there's this big sound going. Before the restaurants, they wouldn't play this kind of music. But now even the restaurants are, it's quite loud and getting louder. If you go to a nightclub, of course, that's there. But I'm saying that, on some level, are we trying to kind of standardize everything, all the differences that are there, all the subtle things that you could hear before, when you bring in a big fat downbeat, and the downbeat for me is a metaphor for a lot of things in other art forms as well. Is there anything like a downbeat and subtlety nullifier in literature, Aatish?
Just stop coming back to Chetan Bhagat every time.
you read it in that. There are others.
No, but it's like I the larger point that I feel that about high culture and low culture and about this dumbing down or whatever, I suppose like we haven't, the role of of arbiters, of discerning publics. Like I used to, for instance, my mother began her career as a journalist in The Statesman, and there used to be an amazing writer about dance at The Statesman. And the role of like the critic of that quality, both in literature and music, and is, I mean, as much as someone can possess talent and even expertise, like any form of art is not simply an emanation of the spirit. Not simply, you need someone on the other end, you know.
Exactly,
and
exactly.
yeah, and that body of work, for instance, in Western literature, about writing. And actually it's very interesting because it's very true in India too. You have this period when, especially after Kavya begins to flourish, where you have 1,000 years of commentarial tradition. Vallabhadeva is writing in Kashmir about the Kumara Sambhava. Malinatha, 800 years, is still writing about the Kumara Sambhava in what is Andhra. You know, so that relationship of building a body of work, of thinking about work, and almost inadvertently being able, I suppose, to form certain categories about it, but we should think of that as happening instinctively. You know, these are just people thinking hard about a work over the ages, and unfortunately it's something that the artistic enterprise needs very badly. It's almost not possible to do it without that.
Yeah, that was kind of what I meant when I said the media also has an important role, because if we you know, I remember my father when he did his drum orchestra in the 70s. The Statesman had a brilliant review of it. I mean, brilliant as in analytical. It was not that they said everything was great. You know, it's just that the way it was reviewed, and they had a full page. But today, if one of us do something or create a work of experiment or whatever, it's more photographs than anybody actually analyzing. So my worry is, as an artist, who analyzes my work? What I'm creating musically? How, there used to be critics before. I don't really see too many of them, or relevant ones at this point. So who am I creating this legacy for? Who is going to analyze my work? So if I do something that is good, that's interesting, who is it for?
You're playing into the dark.
Yeah, I am.
No, I think
It is a worry.
No, I think, you know, I mean, we did have critics and we did have reviews earlier, but it wasn't as if all those critics, I mean, with due respect, it wasn't as if all those critics were well versed in the art forms that they were reviewing.
No.
We've had people who did not understand, let's say, Khambhavati from one gharana, one kind of Khambhavati, and wrote and slashed it to pieces because it wasn't the Khambhavati that they knew, and so they didn't bother to find out. We've even had critics write about concerts that never took place. So yes, we've also had omnipresent critics, at least in Delhi, who wrote about two concerts at the same time in the same city. They were present at both. So we've had, what's the point of a review like that? I think what has not happened usually in India, I'm not sure, I'm not well versed with history, but I think it has to be a peer review. It has to be it has to be you and me sitting there, and if I say, Bikram, I liked this, but I think, you know, here is where perhaps you may want to look at something again. Or if you were to say to me, what a dreadful song you sang for that particular album, it doesn't mean I become your enemy. It means that you've listened to my work and you're critiquing it and telling me that I need to improve, and you have a valid reason for saying so. If I can come up with a counter argument and say, no, I sang it like this because I believe it had to be sung like this, that argument, that space for people who are studying music and who've made a lifelong commitment to music, they have to get together and say, hey, what the hell are you doing? I mean, it's when it will be peer review that that doesn't happen. I mean, at one point of time, I remember I was asked to review a book, a biography written about a very eminent musician. I never made a single irreverent comment. I just felt that it had not been meticulously produced. And the amount of, I mean, there weren't trolls in those times, otherwise I would have to look for asylum somewhere. But really, I mean, this whole idea of critiquing and critiquing by people who are actually studying that form needs to be uh, needs to be given space.
How do you suggest a forum like that is created? Do you think that it should happen in the newspapers, or should it, I mean, what you did was one way of doing it. You know, we could all congregate and come together and, you know, spend 3 days critiquing each other's art. But I'm saying on a broader scale, how would you ideally think such a forum could be created?
New media.
Yes.
New media.
Digital media.
Yeah.
I think the net really makes it possible
does,
for
it
us
does.
to find a space which I love technology and
I would love to listen to you talking seriously about music in some kind of web portal, or like even on, yeah. I mean, that's a those things have the quality of word of mouth at the moment, you know.
I mean, they might not have too many readers, but I think if we are all interested, then, and if we are ready to hear this from each other, I think, and it's not about criticism, it's about a constructive way of saying to each other that, you know, here's what I hear in your work. And I feel this is valid or not valid, and for each of us to be able to respond and to find a space to agree to disagree. And that is really, really important, I feel, which has been missing for a long time. But we'll get into a lot of flack, you know.
But like, but I mean, this none of this is taking away from the larger situation that we find ourselves in, where whether it's, you know, rich businessmen very happy to give a chair of economics in Oxford, they wouldn't think of setting up an institute of classical studies in Delhi. They wouldn't think of like, and so the direction generally of, I don't know, I can't identify the point which would be the beginning point, but there is certainly, I can imagine, quite a practical way in which this process of cultural loss could have been halted, and it's, you know, you don't see that somehow the direction still seems like very powerfully towards the other thing, towards a further. And I don't know, maybe there's a moment when enough loss occurs where people really feel the pain of it and they start to do things to reverse it. I do feel that when I travel and I meet people, that people are upset by it. They're not indifferent by it. They're not completely indifferent to it. They know that over 3 generations in India, a tremendous amount of culture has been lost.
True, true. I just would like to throw one more point into this discussion before we open the house to the audience. Economics and the role of economics in all of this. Serious art, that's what we've been given to talk about. But in serious art, what is the role of economics, and how do you think that it's so difficult now that it is almost becoming impossible for a person who's trying to make a career in so-called serious art to become a professional?
Look, like, I'm going to say, from the example of perhaps the most economically minded society in the world, which may be America, people are paid amazingly well. The guy who's like a classics professor at universities in America is making $250,000 a year. They can fund a man like Sheldon Pollock, who's the head of Sanskrit, who they support in every venture. So I mean, it's clearly like money is not the problem. Clearly, like, when a society is able to achieve a certain kind of like cultural richness, it doesn't, the fact that it's a capitalist society, the fact that it's very money minded, can sometimes, like, I mean, all of those big cultural institutions in America are thriving.
Absolutely. But what about India? Shubhaji, for example, a classical musician or a folk artist, my personal opinion is that being a classical musician in the 60s was economically easier. Today, it's more difficult.
Well, I really look too well-fed to be talking about economic paucity. But really speaking, I think the tragic situation that I find myself in today is that in India, perhaps there are very few organizations that, for example, that fund the arts. I mean, you could
Exactly.
count I mean, all the funding, you will find people who have done interesting projects in the arts and they've been funded by the Ford Foundation, for example.
Yeah.
You will find that a Swiss agency has funded somebody in India. Organizations like, let's say, the British Council
Yeah.
or the Max Miller
I mean,
Institute.
so many of our projects have been funded by the
Yes.
British Arts Council.
Yes, and so I think one that, yes, we know for sure, I mean, that there is no paucity of money for the arts in India, and yet we have not really paused to see why such support is not available within
available.
India. And I think perhaps then again the problem lies of informed support.
right.
People, among the many conferences and discussions that we've done over the years, we once called patrons of the arts to come and speak about their vision for supporting art. And we asked each of them, what makes you decide, what makes you select a particular project to support? And
Yeah.
each one of them said in their own way, it's a whim. I decide on the spur of the moment. So no long-term vision for supporting the arts, not as, and also that arts in India have been supported by philanthropy, and so you are going to be charitable when you wish to appear to be charitable. If you, for a moment you don't wish to appear to be charitable, or decide that charity is better dispensed for a hospital, for example, and that's a worthy cause, of course.
Of course.
But yeah, sorry. I was just going to say that while you're on the subject, an amazing thing that we can't not mention is something like the Murti Classical Library. You have there an American professor, and it's interesting that it would come from there. Sheldon Pollock started the Clay Sanskrit Library. It ran into the sands. He finds, after some flapping about a bit, finally finds Rohan Murthy. And they put the money to like publish basically the grand works of Indian literature with new translations and the original script on the side, like the Loeb books. And I mean, these are the first four books have come out this year, but the reason why it stands out is because, to my mind, it's one of those rare examples of something that should be happening much, much more in India.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would like to say, kind of in summation of this last topic, I think each of us should do something because, like Shubhaji has been doing, we are trying to run the Live-In series by creating a space for musicians, creating at least a little bit of employment for musicians, whatever can be done individually, while